Sorry for being a little late. It's 10 minutes past 6:45. Please call the Committee of the Whole meeting of Tuesday, November 14th to order. And call the roll.
Alderman Strelchak, Alderman Talaco, Alderman Meyer, Alderman Hancher, Alderman Bach,
Here.
Alderman Parrish,
Here.
Alderman Schneider, here, Alderman Gebhardt,
Here.
and Mayor Nurbin.
Here. First up, we have approval of the meeting minutes from October 10th. Is there any comments or questions, or is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Looking around, hearing and seeing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. First up is a discussion on Town Center TID number 3 project, a public project update. Director Towson and Lundeen will give us a quick overview on what's going on Mequon Road.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. We're here to give an update on the construction project in the town center. Staff has been monitoring cost, workmanship, and timing associated with the project. So tonight we want to go over exactly those elements and also acknowledge some additional interest that we've heard from certain council members or just the general public about some of the items, and that we're keeping track of that, and we can get back to those at a later date. We're happy to announce that we are close to substantial completion. There are some remaining items yet in Q4 here of 2023, and there is still the anticipated final completion of June of 2024. What substantial completion for us for Q4 means in terms of what you may not see out there today, but you will see implementation of over the next several weeks, are the pedestrian lights in the new widened terrace areas, paver installation at the intersection locations, and I think some of those are in as we speak. Traffic signal installation at Bunch Rock and Weston. The OIT crossing is open right now, as is the City Hall driveway. We have a number of bollard lights that will be installed. Those bases are in. You just don't see the fixtures yet. Those bollards are located at the OIT crossing as well as along the City Hall driveway. And then there's, of course, a number of punch list items that will continue to work through, not only through the end of the year, but as we move towards closure of the project next year. Then what we have remaining for spring is the median lights. So those are about a little bit higher scale in terms of height of those fixtures. Those go throughout the entire medians of the couple blocks there. All of the gateway signage. On my spreadsheet, we indicated that the original signs were not designed to be breakaway at the base. WSDOT, despite several review processes and a lot of conversation with them, have come back to say that those bases do need to be breakaway. We did explore a few different design options on how to make that happen under the current design. I'm not sure we would like the quality of those, so we just decided to not install any, manufacture or install any of the signs yet. I just didn't want to modify a design on one of the gateway signs and find out that it no longer really matches, the other ones that we installed. Landscaping at the base of all of the street trees, as well as the base of the gateway signage, will go in next year. We've got the advanced warning signals for the OIT, and then again, the punch list items. Here's just some images of some of the work that's been accomplished: new and widened sidewalks, replacement of the former cemetery fence, new street trees. There's new decorative signage out there. You'll see where, not the orange barrels, but the orange cones in the terrace areas where you'll see street lights or pedestrian lights going in, and then as well the landscaping at the base of all of those lights and landscaping at the base of the fence. And I'm sure everyone is happy to note that since this picture was taken, all of those orange barrels are out of the street. Here's another image of the north side streetscape. This is in front of Spur 16 in the public safety building. New and widened crosswalks, again, terrace area, street trees, new signage. We've got the traffic signals pending at this location. Again, the pedestrian lights, and then there will be some added amenities to all of the retaining walls in the town center area as well. Here's a close-up of the paver system installation and some of the street furniture that's peppered throughout the neighborhood. Bunch Rock Avenue, this is, I think, a great picture of the streetscaping that's been implemented by the developer of the P2 project. And then you can see that the sidewalk now extends all the way down to the 2 public schools. In terms of the expenditure status and the contingency, originally we were at a total of about 5.3. We had a 10% contingency built into the project. To date, we've got about a $35,000 overage, and that's in totality across a number of line items. So we're still well within that contingency. And right now, if everything just remained as is, we would come in under budget of about $460,000. I'm sure that number will not be accurate when we come back and talk in June, but that's where we are at as of today. And then in terms of acknowledged interest, I had mentioned the breakaway sign design for the bases. We have heard from some members of the public as well as a few council members about some additional enhancements for the cemetery. Streetlight fixtures, there is an interest that maybe both from a pedestrian light and a median light perspective, that if there were to be some remaining dollars, that we would purchase additional fixtures in the event that we, one of the lights gets run into, that we've got some extra supply and some on hand. And then we still have yet to go through a master banner design. So a lot of the fixtures, the council did choose to get brackets to be able to display banners throughout the year. So we'll be going through that design process over the winter as well. So that's all the comments I have about the status of the project to date, and we're happy to answer any questions or comments that you have.
Turn my mic on. Thank you. Any questions from the committee? I'm sure you all have gotten plenty of questions over the past 6 months as construction's occurred, and it's nice to see a little bit of what was going on. It'll be really nice when it comes back all fresh and green in the spring. But any comments or concerns from anyone on the committee? Alderman Gephardt.
Just a quick question. Nice job, by the way. The work that has not been completed, is that all on a fixed cost basis for that would get completed in either over the winter or the spring?
For the most part, yes. They're just a continuation of the original bid. There are some exceptions for some information we're waiting to hear from. Perhaps not surprisingly, coordination with many different agencies, including the Office of Commission of Railroads, has resulted in some need for some modifications of the design, for example, to the boring that will go under the railroad. So it's anticipated that there will be a cost impact. We don't know what that is yet for some of those adjustments. And we're waiting for final word from WISDOT on the value for the preemption of the traffic signals, but that shouldn't be in excess of what the contingency was. It's just a matter of if it's less than what it otherwise was indicated to be.
Alderman Parrish.
Yeah, thank you again to staff. This is really a top-notch project, and we're all really proud of it. So it's cool to see it all coming to fruition. Director Tollefson confirmed that the power lines are yet to be buried. I was wondering, why are there so many power lines still up? And I hope we're not done. And sure enough, that's next season, it sounds like. So it's going to be very park-like as desired. I was one of the aldermen inquiring about the cemetery. We've gotten some input from the Historical Society with just some creative suggestions, like an archway. I know when I drive by it, feels like it's somewhat unfinished. Like we've spent a lot of time on a lot of the details for the rest of the town center. Maybe there's a few things we can do to honor the history and maybe provide more of a sense of place. You know, like when you're there in the cemetery, you're not necessarily part of the whole town center. So there's just some things we can do, and I appreciated the mayor and Administrator Jones talking about it. It sounds like the right venue might be through the Parks Board, so I am planning on asking the Parks Board to consider kind of taking the subject up and maybe coming forth with a list of recommendations, in conjunction with members of the public who may have a vested interest in the cemetery, such as the Historical Society, come back with a set of recommendations, I hope. And then obviously there's the source of funding. The impetus for this is how much of this can we get paid for under the TIF if we are going to make alterations. And there's very limited ways we can do that. So just wanted to let you know I was going to be making that request, and maybe you guys have other feedback on the cemetery as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Bach.
I don't have any feedback on the cemetery, but this it looks really nice. Have you gotten any initial feedback on the interurban trail connection, or has anybody said anything, or has anybody kind of tested that out, or comments, or
Well, I've spent a lot of time out in the middle of that road, particularly at that crossing, and we do take the opportunity to ask users what they think. And most of the comments have been really, really positive. I mean, some reactions are like, "What? I don't even know what's different," because they're just so focused on traveling. But yeah, there's been really, really positive feedback about it. Just feeling like people are happening to stop more often for them, and liking the sight lines that it provides by being actually parallel with the lanes.
We have heard that it slows people down, and I'm not sure if that's positive feedback or negative feedback, but it was the whole point. So
Yeah.
It's the right feedback. It's neither Any other comments from anyone on the council? Thank you for the update. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
As they alluded to, we'll track a couple of moving items with regard to the railroad and getting the signalization all coordinated and our pedestrian beacons in. That's a late breaking item that just occurred within the last couple of days, so we'll continue to track that ball. But even that, I think, is positive the way it's looking now based off some preliminary feedback. Oh yeah. Is that it for TID 3 public improvements? If so, we'll move on to a resolution item. So resolution 4084, resolution adopting incentive policy for tax increment financial districts number 4 and 5. And who's going to give us the presentation on this? Is this Jack? All right. So as you recall, we've talked about this before. It's been on ice for almost a year. We're bringing it back now for action.
Oh, sorry. So we did add a condition for the residential, to exclude any residential development solely would not be eligible for the TIF. I did clean up the map a little bit, and then I just cleaned up some of the language in the actual policy. So, but anything else was of substance has not changed since the last time you saw it. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right. Are there any questions? Are we sure there's not a question based off the last committee meeting?
The mayor is addressing me without calling my name, so I'm just
Oh.
going to talk. He's looking right
I
at
know
me. It's a
you-
little awkward up here.
I know you want to say something. We had
yeah,
a pretty
yeah.
meaty discussion about this at the last committee meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to tailor my comments and try to be limited. I realize we've had several meetings about this topic. What's interesting is we have something on the agenda later tonight where, if we approve this policy, the item up for discussion will automatically be approved. And the timing is really incidental where we had really a live example to look at as we're approving this fast track tier 1 and tier 2. And I have to say that after seeing the example of what we're doing is there's certain sites at the corners, that would be the Chalet, the Sobelman site, the Ferrante site, the US Bank site, pavilions. Sites like that at the corners, we're saying whether or not you assemble with the neighbors, you would get a 15% incentive, and that's pay as you go over time. And it kind of sounded great philosophically on paper, you know, like, oh yeah, this should spur development. It's taken, you know, development hasn't really taken off on the corridor. And when you actually apply the math to like an example like tonight, it ends up being like approximately $800,000 of essentially tax revenue that we are foregoing. I'm not questioning, I certainly am 100% in favor of the project that's coming forward. I would say that there was some amendments to the motion, which we'll touch on later in the meeting. So I'm not here to try to change what's already been recommended. I'm having some second thoughts. I'm going to be challenged to vote yes on this item. I would much prefer that there be only a 15% incentive in situations where there's assemblage. And I'm now realizing that 15% for corners only, if just the property itself is being redeveloped, I don't find a huge difference between that site versus the site right next door to it that's only getting 5% incentive if they redevelop it. So as I kind of play that out in my head, what I was really hoping for was assemblage and kind of gateway type developments. This is a cute little building at the corner that we're going to be talking about later, and I do think they should get an incentive. It's a challenging market, but 15%, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to support that. So thank you for listening. If no one else feels that way, I don't think there's any amendment to make. I'll just vote no, and we'll be on our way. But I'm certainly in favor of the whole package in general with that one change. Thank you.
Well, I'll follow up and add, I think the original impetus for changing the formula for the TIFs 4 and 5 is we had seen relatively no activity, not zero, but relatively little activity in the TID for the last 10 years. So I think we've amassed a total of 3 projects in a decade using the existing formula. So the idea was to try to enhance it somehow, in some way, for high priority sites, and also I think if it's an assemblage, you could get the higher
Correct.
percentage as well. Assemblage is obviously a little more difficult. You've got to get multiple property owners to agree. But I think I'll just say this, it's been hard to get activity going. It's probably not going to get any easier in a high interest rate environment. If we want to deem more properties high priority due to the condition of the property, we could go back and amend which parcels are considered high priority at almost any time. And maybe that's a better play long term. I don't know if we have to do that tonight because we're rather unprepared to take that challenge on. But that's for those that weren't here a year ago when we first started talking about enhancing our TIF 4 and 5 policy to try to spur more activity, which is a frequent complaint I get about why so much town center, why isn't there more happening on the east side? That's been a very real comment for at least 5 years from people. This was what we came up with collectively over the past year. So we have what we have before us tonight. I know there's probably some sticker shock when you look at what it actually means, but I think the intent was to make it a little sweeter to spur more activity. It just so happens there's one right out of the gate the night we're considering approving it. Any other comments from anyone else? Now's a good time to talk about the policy. Alderman Strelchuk, virtual round.
Yeah, I'm virtual, so just let me know what a good way to raise my hand here is, and I don't want to interrupt the meeting, flow at any point. I'm going to build on what Alderman Pear said, and I too am struggling with this a little bit. Coming from Planning Commission, where there was some pretty pointed disagreement on the architecture of the building, and then there's funding that could be associated with that building. I want to make sure that architecturally
Well,
that
can I interrupt? Can I interrupt? We're not
any
talking about the
facility.
incentive. We're talking about the policy. So I want to keep
Um,
this one on point because they're separate issues, although related.
Separate issues. Unfortunately, this is the example, right? Um, Architecturally, I want to make sure that we have an approval, and that we make sure that it's architecturally what we want to see. And and some of the things that have come through planning commission, just broad brush stroke here for a minute, bear with me. Um, there's been a couple things that architecturally we've slightly disagreed. The developer simply says that's what I want to build, and then we're kind of stuck with do we want to approve it or not approve it? And those are projects that are not usually associated with TIF funding, right? When it's TIF funding and we're not giving them the money, it's a delay in collecting the money, correct? Because they are being taxed at the current rate.
We will take
It's
this.
pay as you
We will
go.
take this specific issue up at council. This is just the TIF formula and the policy, not the authorization of that project. So
I agree, and I'm
just have
getting
to-
there.
Can we
Trust
constrain
me.
the conversation to the topic at hand? I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're getting a
Yeah.
little off topic. That's not on this agenda. It is on the
Okay.
next one.
So going back to what Alderman Parrish has to say with the 15% and being that these are corner buildings and they're high priority buildings, based on the anchor tenant building, policy, anchor tenants bring other businesses in around them because something was developed. The town center MTC1 was developed, and then Spur 16 and the city's investment in that, and that's what spurred the excitement for the rest of town center to take off as quickly as it did. So just in general, the 15% to me is a little bit more than I'm comfortable with as well, in general, if they're not assembling sites. And I mirror what Alderman Parrish says, that right next door they get 5%, another one would get 15%. So I do, and I will be voting no for this tonight, just on that premise alone. The reason I'm voting no is I prefer to see a little bit more policy come forward to talk about what an anchor tenant means to this area and what we can do to actually bring in some more business, and if there would be a qualification process to get additional percent. Again, we don't want to pick winners and losers. We discussed that in the previous meeting, and I apologize to the applicant for of a different project for using them as an example to discuss this, but it just highlights a couple things that make it hard. When we approve something like this and there's tax incremental funding for a building that somebody may or may not want to see, the public gets up in arms and they say, hey, we gave money for this. I want to make sure that we're very clear about what the policy is, why we did what we did, and be able to spell this forward. And I think we're almost there, but I'd like to see just a little bit more policy on what it means to be an incremented use, to bring in more business to the area and to improve the area the way that the city wants to see it approved.
I guess I'll speak to that. I think the Economic Development Board's idea with the high priority sites was not necessarily as a spur for other sites. They looked at locations and conditions of existing structures and buildings and deemed them to be high priority because of their location or their condition. So I don't think it really meant to spur on other development other than just improving the general look of the area. And I think, in this case, and it's hard to segregate the policy from the next application, but with that application, it is working. We are getting a new building on a corner of a property that is getting tired and needs to be repaired or replaced. So the policy itself is working, it's giving the incentive to do that. I guess if the council's concerned about architecture or design, that's something they could add as a condition of the individual incentive, saying that the commission should not waver from our standards in any sense or make sure that we get the product we're looking for. But in terms of the policy itself, I think it's doing what the intent of the Economic Development Board wanted, was to focus on those sites if it was not a combination.
I think we really have to separate the two. One is just the policy. One is exercising an individual development agreement to get an incentive. I guess that's why
Agreed.
we've had these meetings. Well, we had one last month to provide some feedback. That would have been an excellent time to have some additional guardrails. It's been sitting on the shelves for about a year where we talked about it in substantively the same form a year ago. We've gone a year with little feedback. So it's a little frustrating to get to this point and have people have a little bit of remorse over what they've done, but maybe seeing the numbers is what made people think of it. But I think if we don't change the policy and enhance it in some way, no one should complain about not getting it used more. And that's something I think most of us have been concerned about at some point. And I know members of the public at large have made comments, why isn't more happening on Port Washington Road? We've had a TIF for 10 years and relatively little has changed. If we want other sites to be considered high priority due to their condition, we can certainly review that at any time and make a tweak to those locations we think are higher priorities. But the product coming out of Economic Development Board was what was recommended, and no one really challenged those suggestions at the time. It's only after there's a project finally in front of us. I'll stop for now. Is there another comment or a motion, perhaps? Alderman Talaco.
I'm just seeking clarification because I don't quite understand why. How did the 15% incentive come about over the 5%?
Well, as I described before, we weren't getting a lot of takers at the 5%. So we
had the original
Jack, take it over. I think Jack's got a
the
very
original
thorough explanation.
TIF project plan stated 5% or 10% for a combination. So there was a criteria in the current TIF project plan that says if you combine parcels, you get a 10%. And as the mayor stated, for the last 10 years, especially in the northern TIF, there's been no takers on that. So the Economic Development Board said we should incentivize it even further. So they wanted to go up to 15%. So that's where the jump became from 10 to 15. So the sites that combine properties used to be 10, now they're 15. And then we added this component of being a high priority site to get the 15 as well. So that's kind of the history to that. And I'll also say that with only 16 years left in this TIF, it seems like a long time, but payback on these things is going to be more and more challenging as the years go by. You're going to have to create a lot of value in order to get that full payback. So even with the proposal ahead of us, 800,000, they may not get all that over the payback because they just may not have the value over that time frame as well. So as the years go by, we're going to be more and more challenged to pay back this entire incentive unless we want to change the policy to go to something other than pay-as-you-go, which I don't think the board or this board would really be in favor of.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about changing the structure of it. The pay-as-you-go is a nice model that reduces our risk.
Yes.
And you do bring up a good point. Even the one that we're not talking about now, that we'll talk about later, the formula contemplates a higher number, but it's truncated by the ability to pay it back in the time that's remaining in the TIF. There's not that many years left. 16 years sounds like a long time, but it's not that long because this all gets paid out over time. So we can approve it as written. We can amend it at any time if we want to change it in the future or if we want to add other sites. I just think after everything we've been through, it'd be a shame to do nothing and have largely the same policy we have now. But that's not for me to decide unless there's a tie. Alderman Bach.
Was I correct? I mean, the reading, the Economic Development Board tossed this around, and was there 8 or 9 members on there, and did they approve this unanimously for approval? Or what was that discussion? Is that they're okay with this?
Well, they approved it, recommended it to us. I can't recall if it was unanimous.
Yeah, in the report it was 8-0. Yeah, 4. Yes.
On the proposed policy came through them as well, so they've.
Yeah, I was speaking to the policy. I wasn't speaking to the specific incentive.
Yeah. I believe they recommended the other thing as well.
Yes.
That we're not talking about. Any other questions, perhaps, or a motion?
I move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further comments, questions? Hearing and seeing none, please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchak,
No.
Alderman Talaco,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Bach,
Aye.
Alderman Parrish,
No.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Gephardt,
Aye.
and Mayor Nurbin.
Aye. That gets recommended onto the council. Next, we have a discussion item, City of Mequon 2022 to 2025 IT Strategic Plan Update. So Assistant Administrator Schoeneman's going to give us an overview. I will mention we also received a confidential memo in regards to this item too. We're not going to talk about the confidential portion here. If there's interest in going deeper on any of that, let me know after the meeting and we can schedule a closed session item for next month or the month thereafter to pull on that thread a little more. But for the rest of it, take it away, Justin.
Thank you. I'll do my best to be brief. I know that time is ticking on our committee of the whole clock. As stated in the memo, the IT division transitioned to the city administrator's office to be one of our divisions back in 2020 as part of change that started occurring with longtime finance director Tom Watson retiring, Director Krieger coming in for a bit, and we moved IT to admin since all departments heavily use IT resources nowadays versus back in the day when it was largely your finance department. And as a part of that transition, we brought Avero advisors on board to tell us the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever we need to know about where our current state to help us develop a plan so we can strategically move forward and advance the organization's IT resources in a best manner possible. And that process took several months from meeting stakeholders, consultants, departments, and the generated report that was ultimately linked into tonight's agenda. And it's been our kind of our springboard since. That was the driving force behind switching us from a part-time IT contracted service provider to a full-time IT manager. That was Jeff Crawford at the time. He got opportunity to go somewhere else, and this year in June we brought Matt Fortini on board as our new IT manager. If you haven't had an opportunity to work with him, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help, and I'm sure Matt will come to a future meeting. And we also have public safety IT specialist Pat, who's actually behind the scenes right now doing the videography work for us. And across our team, plus other departments who are all lending hands, in some cases leading the charge, we've hit some good accomplishments over the last couple of years. And a lot of the work can be kind of classified as foundational work or work that builds the base for us to do more, meet our customers both internally and externally where they're looking for us to be on the IT front. We've done everything from redesigning our entire network, replacing aged equipment that couldn't support the modern day resources, bandwidth needed to deal with cloud systems, for instance, to deactivating 9 physical servers and replacing 15 plus dated PCs here at City Hall alone. And on top of that, we ran into projects that weren't necessarily listed in the strategic plan, but things we needed to hit. We were able to redo the city's print services contract, consolidate it all into one, and save $15,000 a year going forward. We've had service issues with our past phone provider, where we would lose connectivity at no fault of our resources, but the provider. And we're able to get out of that contract and switch to a new one, and we're doing that same thing with one of our internet providers now. And we've rolled out some additional non-public safety help desk resources. So everyone's not coming to the door looking for the IT manager to help them, but have the ability to reach out to a help desk during normal business hours. On top of that, a big lift that we did was migrating the city's primary software outside of Microsoft, the Munis Tyler Tech software, to the cloud. That was originally a project Avero scoped for 3 years. We did it in 10 months because we had no choice, because our current version was going to be unsupported, and that's where all of our financials go through, so we needed to be on the latest and greatest. So we pushed it as fast as we can, which is partially why we aren't following the IT strategic plan to a T on the timing, but we're adapting to the realities we kind of face as we're going down the list. We've replaced primary systems at City Hall that kind of serve like your core business practices, from cashiering systems and accounts payable, hardware in our other departments as well. The community pool got attention. It got Wi-Fi, a new ID maker, audio video upgrades, to conference rooms getting upgrades, or installations they've never had to allow us to work with residents and contractors and staff meetings more efficiently, to oodles of software updates that have been across the department that haven't been able to been done. We've now started to do, so staff are kind of getting out of those buggy issues you get with old software and are more efficient and able to help move forward. So that's just a quick highlight of some of the larger projects. There's a bunch more we've done to continue to advance the organization, and some of the ones that are currently in motion are in-person credit card processing. Finance is the lead, and IT is along the way to help. The clerk's office is pushing forward with digital business licensing, and that'll be launching here in the next couple of months as well. We have an e-signature tool, so we can stop pushing as much paper around. Staff have been trained on it, but we need to do another rollout to make sure departments know what it is, and they can start to leverage that resource. We're going to be rolling out a IT resource center, knowledge base, and a new way to track system tickets and requests from big to small, so we can understand what our users need and also prioritize better. And we're helping human resources launch an employee self-service module, so all those basic needs, change of address, approving of policies and forms, all be done digitally. And we're helping the police department right now with a server project. So those are some of the projects on the larger side that are in motion. And once we get done with those, we're already looking towards next year. And there's some big projects that we know we have to do, amongst others. Some of those big projects include the land management system, the acquisition. We have to switch to a .gov instead of a .wi.us, and that's a requirement by the federal government. And so they're going to give us a deadline. We just got to make sure we're in advance of that deadline. And Public Works is our next large department to be on the review of their IT resources for fleet and asset management to a parks recreation system, so for reservations like pavilions, for instance. So those are some of the things we have slated for 2024. There's a lot more in the strategic plan that we're going to continue to grab and work through, and I think we've made some good headway. The study itself calls for a team of 3 full-timers, and we're doing it with a fraction thereof, and we're still making decent headway. So I think we're doing well with our resources, and there's much to go. So without any further ado, I'm happy to yield for questions and thoughts.
Sorry, I muted myself again. Any questions from the committee? Good update. Nice to know, get a pulse check on where we're at and get a look ahead for 2024. Seeing any questions? Going once, going twice? Seeing none, let's move right along. We can, is everyone comfortable skipping the planning calendar? If we need to amend that, just let me know. We'll get it on a future calendar. And is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're
Aye.
adjourned.